We are going to open the floor for questions. I know that now we are going to have a very interesting conversation, and we are looking for that dialogue. So what we are going to do is we are going to pass the mic. Okay, and please, I was just about to ask you, do not start asking the question until you get the mic, because this session is recorded, so we would like to have your question as long as the panelist answers. So anybody who would like to ask our guest speakers any questions now? And don't be shy. Okay, yes? Let me just quickly give you the mic.
I wanted to ask Tom, because you referred to consistency in terms of color for your line, the wool line. I wanted to know if you're successful in achieving that, and if so, is there a lot of waste?
I'm going to let Jody Mckenzie answer this, because she pays much closer attention to consistency than I do.
Consistency between dye lots can vary between every single dye lot of the same color. And we do have a machine that dyes 100 pounds of garments at a time, which is roughly, for us, 300 plus, 300 to 400. So we can end up with a lot of consistent colors. And I do weigh everything out by the gram, every single garment, as well as all of the dye stuff. So they are as consistent as can possibly be. And Tom did mention that sometimes we have different lots of fabric that we're working with. And so if we have a men's Henley that was made with one batch of fabric and some others that were made with another, there can be variations with those as well. And the other thing that causes the variations is when we get a new batch of dye stuff in, either from a different location or just the weather, the soil, the weather. It all makes a really big difference. So, but I like to think that we can accentuate the uniqueness of the garments, and not that they're mass produced, because they're not. And so I think it's actually an advantage to have some variation between dye lots and colors.
And I'll just say, it gets to be amusing when you're presenting to a buyer. You say, well, now this is pewter and this is charcoal. And after a few minutes, they'll say, now, which is this? Which is pewter and which is charcoal? So we have a little card inside every package that says to the consumer, there is variation. It's the way it is. And I think the consumer likes to know, and they accept that fact. But the retailer is a little tougher on us when they see the variation.
Here. Who are you?
Just a technical question. So do you use a jigger and dye the fabric? Kind of thing.
I'm not sure exactly what a jigger is, so I don't think we use it.
You don't use it. How do you? Okay. Well, it's a garment dyeing.
We're garment dyeing.
I'm blown away by this fineness of wool yarn. I didn't know U.S. could even spin that and weave that. I mean, after the meltdown of U.S. textile industry in 2002, I just thought that was impossible. And the fact that you do garment dyeing, not like cone dyeing, like quite a lot of times they dye yarn on the cone.
Right.
And then because wool gets thermal shock or fulling with water and agitation, that's very easily happen. And also I was wondering about any problem of moth it's such fine wool and it's easy to get eaten by moth?
We don't have any moth problems, so we do watch for them, and we have a company that comes in and puts in some traps for us. But there are a lot of challenges associated with keeping those garments in good condition as they go through the dyeing process. They're dyed in paddle dye machines, so there's constant motion there, and there's been a definite learning curve to get them to come out really well.
Okay, next.
I had a question that was related to something Peter said, and that since you're making natural dye product, did you have any instances of people complaining about sensitizing substances, like being allergic to something in the dye stuff? Or I was curious about that because sometimes we get that question from the consumer about certain synthetic dyes. But I was wondering about your the wool, the Tom,
Yes.
your product. Whether you had any complaints from customers about being sensitive to the dye stuff.
The comments that we get most often are one of surprise that this is wool and it's not scratchy, and I'm allergic to wool, and how come I'm not itching? It's mostly positive. However, we do have some colors that will leave a very slight impression of a little more harsh finish than another color. It's pretty indiscernible at this point in the way we do it, but I think for the most part we've been getting good consumer acceptance on the feel.
I can add something about Allergic. You have heard of GOTS. You remember, I don't know who spoke of GOTS, Global Organization Standard Label, yes. Our natural dyes, our range of natural dyes are GOTS certified. And within GOTS, you have to measure 22 allergic molecules, and they are free of allergy. So if there are allergy, it's much more with the fiber than the dye.
These 22 are dye stuff. They are not natural. So the molecule from the natural dye stuff is not tested. So the sensitizing dye stuff they are mentioned in the GOTS standard are synthetic dyes. So just today we have no information about cancerogenic sensitizing, fish toxicity, bacteria toxicity, algae toxicity, and all this stuff. We need that data, and we need that data anyway if the product should be registered in the EU. So we need that data. But the difficulty is, I have to say, that there are costs involved. To register one chemical in the European Union means $250 for a simple dye stuff, for a simple softener. And if you have a critical substance, a biocide, for example, you have to pay 1 million and more. So 1 million is the minimum. We make all these tests and all these studies in universities for exposure, ecological and toxicological tests. So that's very expensive, and they try to avoid tests with animals, as you know, like pharmaceutical or in this area. And the only way to reduce costs for a chemical company is to work together in that area. So that's a part of the REACH registration, that you can work together, for example, a buyer with a BASF and a Huntsman together, so that they can reduce cost. But the difficulty I see now with natural dye stuff, you have not many companies where you can share the test cost. And this has nothing to do with natural dyes. You have to register as long as as when you have more than 1 ton, when you deliver more than 1 ton.
Peter, I want to follow up with one of your comments. you mentioned about maybe 22, I don't remember exactly the number of, I think 20 some around perfumes that they were banned from
the European Union.
right.
So
Can you go
it's
on?
chemistry. So if it's natural based or if it's synthetic, chemistry is chemistry, and every molecule has a different tox profile, and we have to know that. And natural perfume are made in a similar way like natural dyestuffs. So it's an extraction. It's very famous in the south of France, in Grose. They are producing since decades this kind of perfumes, and 27 are banned from the European Union. They are listed in the web. You can find them.
Okay.
Very interesting.
I have a question for Tom over here.
Yes.
Did you start out you started with synthetic dyes?
No.
Oh, you always were with the natural dye?
Well, we started with our values.
Okay. No, because I wanted to ask the transition. How was the transition? But you always started
No,
with using natural dyes.
we started from scratch with natural dyes, and we learned through trial and error.
Okay. Now, I have another question about the thread. Because you dye the whole garment,
Yes,
the thread that you use,
is silk.
it's silk thread, so it
Yes.
takes the dye. Okay.
Well,
that's what I was wondering.
that
Pretty
depends
much.
upon the dye.
Yeah, pretty
Indigo
much.
does not take the silk. Silk does not take the indigo very well, but most of our other dyes take it pretty well, so it's a tonal effect.
So you use silk for all your garments? Silk thread?
Absolutely every one.
Wow, that's very good to know.
And we use nut buttons. I'm not sure what nut.
The lady's going to speak. I have a question for all the panels, since you come from such different parts of the industry. It's about projections into the future. I wanted to know if there's any processes that you would like to see improved upon or perfected in the near future in your parts of the industry.
That's a good question. I like that. So definitely everybody's talking about green chemistry, and EPA made a statement with these 12 points, and that's another dangerous development, that green chemistry, everything is okay if it's green chemistry. So we have to be very careful. So what my vision is, we need dyestuffs with a very high exhaustion ratio. We have that 100% with pre-reduced sulfur dyes. So we have a pickup 99 to 100%. With wet dyes we have 98 up. So that's a good thing. But always is a disadvantage. Not many dyers can really deal with this dye stuff because it's much more difficult to manage this dye process. It's much easier to dye a direct dye or a reactive dye. And the other part is that we can produce, we are talking always about dye stuffs. The dye stuffs are visible, but on textile are a lot other chemicals, or in pre-treatment. We need chemicals. They are made not from oil-based source. So my vision there is that we can start, and now you will kill me, I know, that we can start with waste from farm. Waste, for example, we produce in textile a lot. That means sludge. So every textile mill produces sludge, tons and tons a day, if they have a wastewater treatment. And with this sludge, with the GMO process, we can start producing chemistry again, biopolymers or something like that, so that we can use bio-waste, real bio-waste, to synthesize new products. So that should be the future, more efficient and less harmful.
Is the GMO, is it like an enzyme process? Or?
Enzyme is a product from a GMO process. So we have to accept, because this is a very intelligent production. So in normal, please correct me, where is the chemist? In chemistry, normal chemistry, we need high pressure. We have sometimes critical catalysts to start the process. We need critical solvents, chlorinated solvents in the normal old chemistry. And the future is if we can work with bio-based process, we are on a normal temperature. We don't need these critical catalysts, and we can start with a bio-based material. So that's maybe the future of our industry, and it should go in such a way.
I was going to say my industry, but on the education side, I would say that, well, if you take, for example, the CFDA, which is the big design competition that all our colleges enter, they still require, 13 figures with coordinating outfits as a collection, that is really the model of being in a department store floor, and it's a push of a collection out. And so I would actually like to see that those competitions start to consider some of these newer, inherently less wasteful business models, and then for us to be teaching to that, like when we have elements of business as a class, should be all those different business models or opening them up to those different ways. But it's just like being in the industry, the fashion industry, or in a company, being inside a college is also, there's entrenched, there's entrenched things as well. It's very similar.
This might be a pipe dream, but I see the future where large industries are broken down, and we have more localized production, actually, and we see production shifting to more cooperative enterprises, so that they're less centralized and more localized. Because I think if people start really taking control of the way things are produced, we'll care more about the environment, and things, will be less wasteful, and we'll think about things in an interconnected sort of way, and not in a way where it's just about, where it's only profit driven. Because, it was so disheartening to hear that now all the chemicals are being shifted over to China, and the production is happening there. And so the problem just moves somewhere else, and damages another culture. I just see it problematic. And I think the only way things can really get better is if we start to think about the whole picture and think about things kind of changing from the ground up, and having people invest more in their communities and in their community businesses and local factories and things like that.
Okay. I'd like to pick up on that. I think that's a great idea. The idea that if we had global ecological standards, we wouldn't be in nearly as much trouble as we are. The pollution's gone overseas. We have clean processes, but not everyone's using them. I like the enzyme idea. We need more and more enzymes. You know about corn-based fibers. To make that, you need to turn corn into lactic acid. To do that, you need genetically modified enzymes. The big thing, and I think Lynda hinted at this in her talk, the choice is when you walk into a store is buy it or don't buy it. If you don't buy it, there's no resources, there's no waste, there's no dye, there's no energy, there's no water. So can we learn to live with less?
You go ahead, Yoshiko.
I just want to interject about the education. I think the consumer education is very important as well. And I see, like Christina Kim's line, she makes things that are so precious, but people who know and who can discern the quality in the feel of the fabric and the finish, those are the people who pay a little extra. And then if they buy that products, they wouldn't throw it away, never. Even I have many dosa clothes that are torn or ripped, but I still keep them because I can't get rid of it. And then one has this kind of personal relationship and appreciation of products. And I think that's something we are losing in this day. I mean, young people don't know where silk comes from. I was in Hong Kong and I was teaching students and tell me how silk cloth is made. Tell me how silk crepe is made. They didn't know. So I think that kind of education, and this is something we do through Slow Fiber Studios as well.
I'm sorry, I'm going to jump in front of you 1 second, Tom, because it's so related to what Yoshiko is saying. I think we as educators from the top level administration down really have a responsibility to review and improve our curriculum so that it is integrated, so that our students have time in the classroom to learn where our fabrics come from, to learn about the materials that we're using, to bring back appreciation of material into design education.
Oh, I'm sorry. Did I just cut in front of you? Okay. Just in response to what you just said, that moved me because I teach, and I think it's so critical to have students, yes, understand materials, but from the minute, from where the material comes from like growing it to, and be in touch with it that way. In the courses that I teach, we actually spin wool, and we have people come from local, like we have local producers come and they bring freshly shorn wool, and we skirt it and process it with the students, just so they know when they go out there as designers, like where the origin of materials. And it also talks about designing with transparency, which is also critical to instill. To young designers, they should really have that notion of transparency in what they do. Oh.
I would like to, I'd like to see the industry become more consumer-driven and less design-driven. One of the things that I've noticed coming from the personal care or consumer brands business is that this is a very ego-driven world. And the more we put the authority in the hands of the consumer, an educated consumer, then the consumers will begin to determine just what they want. Right now, most of what we offer as a made in America product is a fabric made in China and shipped here and then cut and sewn in America. That kind of separation leaves the brand with little knowledge of what's gone into manufacturing the fabric. Now, there's an enormous amount of inherent waste, not sloppy waste, just inherent waste. But the amount of that waste that can be reused is quite significant, particularly with wool. So if we were more vertically integrated, or if we were more knowledgeable as a consumer society, which could come through the educational arm, we would take more responsibility for the kind of sustainable results that we want. The most curious criticism I have of what we do is at trade shows, because we are providing a lot of information about sustainability and how things are made. And we're told that we provide too much information, and it's really all about the garment. When I started the toothpaste business, it was all about a brand on 4 panels, the brand name. But when we started Tom's, we had one panel for the brand name and 3 panels of information. The ingredients, the purpose, the source. We started educating consumers, and we put the power in the hands of the consumers. We need to do this in this industry. We need to we need to educate a consumer on sustainability.
Along those lines, I have a request for information as a maker, as someone who came to working with textiles and dyes through the humanities and not through chemistry. I've never taken a chemistry class in my life, and I now deeply regret that because it's the one piece of information I could have done in high school or college that actually would help me in what I do every day. And so what I would love, a great resource for me and would also help students, is a just basic pamphlet of basic chemistry for dyers. There's probably 10 key principles of chemistry that would help us as makers and as consumers understand the supply chain in a deeper way than we do. I mean, I have a very rote understanding of pH and what I have to do to raise or lower pH, but I don't really understand it. I don't know how to read a molecular diagram and really understand that. And so I'm just putting that out here. Anne, you could write that, Martin, Peter. It would be enormously helpful to a lot of us who are working with these materials but don't really understand how they interact with each other.
I just want to respond to that just as a designer, because I certainly don't have the knowledge that Nelson Hauser does from Ciba-Geigy, who's now at Burlington Chemical or wherever he is. And I never expected myself to necessarily. So what I would advocate more than that is, well, two things. Like when I work with clients on education and sustainability, I actually give them a project to go out and do research in their own supply chain, because they know their own supply chain more than anyone else. It's not a theory, it's not abstract, and they have a direct interaction. And it also changes the relationships in the supply chain. Like they have to interface with someone in their supply chain in a different way than I want it at this price, next week. And it unearths things that I would never think to ask. They unearth things for themselves and then they own. So I would actually advocate, rather than learning something abstractly, and you can correct, maybe there's many different ways of learning. But for those of us who are designers, we're usually experiential learners, and there is nothing like getting into the supply chain, witnessing, the water being used in the camp, and then learning firsthand. So that's that. Can I just go back to that, also the communication thing? Because I agree that I'm going to call them wearer collaborators, need to be educated. And I question if that education can happen when the people that are putting forward the education is the industry itself, because we're limited by the fact that we want to sell more stuff. And so we would never educate about another thing besides selling more stuff. And we're also, like Patagonia has a catalog, it can say a lot of stuff, it's consumer, or it's whatever, is interested in the outdoors, in the fashion industry, or in the more, sort of dressy clothing industry, whatever you'd like to call it, different segments. They don't have a customer that's got the same kind of ears. Then there's corporate culture. There's all kinds of things that come in that hinder getting not pure, but just factual information that's out there. So, but anyway. I'm sorry. Do you want to say anything?
Yes.
It's difficult for me because in English it's hard to, and we have two chemists. I am not a chemist, I am an engineer in agronomy. And, and we have some biochemists at the lab. I just can give an answer for natural dyes, not for synthetic dyes. I don't know synthetic dyes very well. What I can say is that I can explain how we made our natural dyes, how does the plant grows, what are the inputs, what is the water consumption, oil consumption for the machine. And we try to do a part of a life cycle, but we can't obtain any information from synthetic firm. We ask a lot, and we can't have any information because we should have liked to compare production of, well, it's difficult to compare, but to compare production on 1 kilo of, I don't know which red dyes, versus natural dyes, which is quite complicated, but we should have liked. And we never obtain figure from synthetic dyes. So for natural dyes, we can explain how they are produced and how simply you can use them to dye, to obtain such or such color. It's part of question. But I think synthetic dyes and chemical industry are rather opaque. Is there somebody speaking French here? Opaque? Opaque? Opaque. Opaque. In my opinion.
Yeah. There is Michele.
So this might be the antithesis of what you just said, but I have had a 12-year relationship with American textile chemists and colorists, having nothing to do with synthetic dyes, but having everything to do with understanding how they strike, because I'm just one person in Seattle trying to make a difference with the dyes that we buy all over the world. So I went to them and said, I need help. And so I actually went to one of the largest factories and just observed how they did their colors. And then I asked them, would they use natural dyes, just so I could see how they took and did they penetrate and do all of that. And the great thing they did for me, because again, it wasn't my original expertise, was that he actually did a strike chart for me for every single dye, which I couldn't get anywhere else, right, at that time. You know, when did cochineal strike and how long did it hold? And we found out that cochineal struck in two ways, right? They bonded. It just depended on how the making of the cochineal extract, which is what I was using then, was made, right? So I have used that, and I actually have those strike charts still and could share them with at least a university and definitely people who could benefit from it, because that will help you out.
Well, for example, let me give it another example that Ellen and I were talking about before. The other day I was dyeing a bunch of cloth with weld and madder for a class I'm teaching back home. And I was using the cold mordanting techniques that we're learning from Michele Garcia. And I didn't know if we wanted to over dye it, if I had to go through the mordanting process again. So I cut little strips of everybody's cloth from the night before and threw them all in the madder bath, and they took really great. So I thought, oh, wonderful, we don't have to mordant again. The mordant is still there. And I was explaining this to Ellen, and Ellen, whose science understanding is streets beyond mine, explained to me that that's because there were still, on a molecular level, mordant available, that all the mordant hadn't been taken up yet by the first dye bath. If it had, then I would have had to remordant. So that was extremely helpful information for me to have.
There are some nice books, and Dominique Cardon books in English is the Bible for natural dyeing, really. So,
thank you.
And if not, ask us. Dominique Cardon. C-R-R, je sais pas, D-O. I confuse with your. Can you say Cardon?
Google it.
C-A-R-D-O-N. There's one question here.
All right. I got really excited during the conversation about cultivating an educated consumer base and education within retailing, within marketing. I think that's absolutely fascinating. Also, here at Parsons, people invest a great amount of time and money to learn these things, but it is a venue in which you can really grow and learn and understand these processes in very nuanced ways. I was interested elaborating on your point, Lynda. You mentioned, or you suggested almost a third party that would sort of mediate between the consumer and the designer. And I'm curious what you see that third party looking like.
Would it be a third party? Let me think about this. Well, I might back into your question because I haven't thought about what it might look like. But one of the education things that I've been involved in, which has been tremendous, has actually been between the industry and farmers. So, for example, especially in California, enormously polarized conversation about water use and who gets what, and the salmon and the spelt and all kinds of things. And well, let me admit something, actually. In the 90s, I was part of demonizing cotton and demonizing farmers, like educating through presentations to industry about the benefits of organic. And one of the things we did, we do still, is bring brands into the farms to meet with the farmers so that they can see cotton cultivation, ask questions directly, and so on. And and it's influenced quite a lot of companies to do organic. But what it does is it breaks down these polarized positions, these dichotomies. And because the farmer's right there, even with all that technology, he's struggling to stay on the land. Why is that? He can't compete with an overseas Indian grower. Why is that? How can we collaborate? And so the conversation shifts. And we even have activists that come on those farm tours. Like there was one person said, Patagonia was getting organic cotton from one of two farmers in California that was growing organic ones, but he was also growing GM cotton. And this activist said, Patagonia should strike them off his list. And I said, well, that would be the only person in California that would be growing. So there are these kind of idealized, or what's the word? There's these ideologies that are out there that start to unfreeze, soften as well, when you're person to person and really understanding the bigger picture. So that's the kind of education I would advocate. And what would that be like? Well, I guess we could bring Waeber collaborators on the farm tours. Would actually really enjoy that. And actually Waeber's buying directly from farmers, I think, would be really great. Or collaborating with farmers on a project to bring cotton to market. I'm really would love to. I'm actually trying to articulate that. So but anyway, do you see what I mean? So a third party. Well, I know that Peter works as a third party. Really, don't people disclose things to you that they wouldn't feel comfortable disclosing to the brand? But that's within industry, so that's business to business. It would have to be someone who doesn't have an agenda.
Yeah. Absolutely.
Which includes non-profits also, so to be discussed.
And the educational institutions, because, with strong research
and I think this would also be, we talked about new business models and what companies should adopt, and certain industries, certain level of industries in the fashion industry that are a little bit nervous about sort of converting to, let's say, all natural process, or losing business, or wondering what's going to happen if they switch gears, switch models, or from an economic standpoint, maybe this is those new positions that would be created within companies, or new positions that will sort of bring forth new business models. That sort of third party who has a connection to the company, has a connection to, let's say, the farmer, artisan, whoever that other person is, but they do not have agenda other than what we've been talking about here is the environment and sustainability.
Can I just say something really quickly? I think it's very important to mention that it really boils down to the design level and to the consumer level in both ways, for two reasons. When you're designing, you need to really learn about where the livestock and the products come from. And I do actually agree with Lynda when she says that we really need to connect with the farmers. I spent 4 years at St. Martin's School of Art in London, and I was trained to design. I was never told where the goods came from. I left St. Martin's and I worked for designers, and I still didn't have a clue where my dyes came from. And I was encouraged to design. 15, 20 years later, I'm progressing because I want to get in touch with what everything comes from and how it's made. And I'm regressing on what I did all those years ago. And yes, I have worked for people like John Galliano, and I have worked for people like Comme des Garçons, but the ethics of designs are very minimal. They don't really care. And I'm going to touch on a very sensitive point, which is designers here in America. I don't really know very much about what Parsons does and what they do to encourage their students to work in industry when they leave. And I would imagine you encourage them to go and work with Marc Jacobs and Diane von Furstenberg and such likes. But having approached design members of designers in New York, they really don't care where the dyes come from and where they're made, as long as they make a buck. And I think that's where we need to really go back to and educate ourselves, educate designers, and educate the consumers.
I'd like to jump a little bit here because I appreciate what you're saying. I just want to maybe talk about the other kind of designers that they do care. And I've seen it with my own eyes. For one instance, Eileen Fisher, we have... No. But I do believe that it makes a difference. And when we went in India, we actually seen how Eileen Fisher is working with the local artisans, with the local weaving community, and contributes to being sustainable. So that's 10%, but it's for real. And I didn't know about the green new initiative, but that's another way. Yes, Patagonia, it's a very good example, but they were followers. So it's not, right now, it's not only Patagonia actually initiated a wonderful educational initiative and opened the door for others to follow. I think it's a wonderful way to gather the designing community all over the world. This is not only for the America. This is, I mean, we know quite a lot. Yes, absolutely. Timo, yes. Sorry.
I hope you don't mind me standing up, but there was a question about what Parsons is doing, and I think I can answer that. Hi everyone, I'm Timo Rissen, and I'm the Assistant Professor of Fashion Design and Sustainability in the School of Fashion. And first of all, I think all of the Parsons faculty can attest to the fact that every year there's more students interested in sustainability, which is fantastic. I can also say that moving forward from 2013 fall, I think all of the programs will have learning outcomes for all of the students where ecological literacy and also we're also now talking about sustainability literacy, and you know the boundaries between those two are like you know they're sort of malleable, but certainly ecological literacy is something that's being embedded into all of the programs across Parsons, which is just amazing and very exciting development. So and that's partly driven by what students are asking of us, which is very heartwarming. And I think with all of the 4 programs in fashion, so the 2 AAS programs, BFA and the MFA, every year there's more students interested in sustainability, and we have to deliver. And and so it's very exciting in that sense.
So at this point, then the students would need to work with industry in order to make the big change, because they can come up with ideas, they can think about sustainability, and they want to learn about the farmers and they want to know how to make products. But is the industry ready to take on the students who are coming out with new ideas? That's my question.
Actually, as I'm not in the industry, I'm not sure I am the right person to answer that, but I can speak to, I know that there are companies like Eileen Fisher. I mean, I visited Eileen Fisher in October and November last year to speak to the design teams both here in New York on Fifth Avenue and also in Irvington. And even companies like, well, there's a number of companies that have approached us to find out more about what our students are capable of. So that's, to me, that as an educator, that's really, it gives me cause for optimism that there's also, it's, it's a two-way street really, and the conversations are starting to emerge, which is fantastic.
Okay, one there and then.
Yeah, I had a statement and I had a question for Michele. The statement was that in our discussion about Dominique Cardone and her Bible of natural dyeing, she has been coming and will come to the Textile Society of America Symposium in September in Washington, Textiles and Politics, and she has been giving a workshop as well. I'm not sure about this year. And also Jenny Balfour Paul will be coming, and she's an extraordinary speaker, works through the Silk Road Ensemble, and will be doing a presentation on indigo. Yoshiko, are you also speaking in September? Exactly. Cochineal workshop with 3 different mordants at the Virginia Center for the Arts, I think it is. And Michele, are you there also? Are you speaking at TSA also?
I've been asked. I haven't replied. I have to look at my calendar, that's all.
I think the program for September is set, but anyway, so that's what my statement. But my question, Michele, about natural dye and indigo, and concerning indigo not being good to dye the silk threads for the knitwear. I was wondering about all the extraordinary ikat dyeing in Central Asia utilizing indigo. And why is it not working here for the threads, or are those kaftans fugitive? Is the indigo fugitive? Those old...
The old kaftans?
Khalats and...
Remember, silk thread doesn't dye?
But it does.
It takes differently.
It just takes differently.
Yeah.
And it takes more dye, it takes better preparation, right? It takes a lot more time to do it. To make
so
it
it's
work.
not that
and
it doesn't,
so,
it's
you
not
know, you have to
working
ask
here.
yourself if it's cost effective.
I see.
Therefore, I think those are...
Okay. I just want to thank all of you for being here and for being so eager to discuss these very urgent questions. I just want to remind you that there will be about a half an hour book signing, and Lynda and I think Yoshiko will be outside the auditorium for those who are interested in getting their books and DVDs. So once again, thank you very much, and have a wonderful weekend.